What's going on YouTube? Culturedog Sam Hatch back here with another video, another Blu-ray Spotlight review, and this one is not out yet. It's coming out shortly from Arrow Video, and it is no less than the 1972 Wes Craven classic, The Last House on the Left. I should have added Notorious Classic to that because, yes, The Last House on the Left is one of those films that I grew up hearing about from people that were normally into horror films, that this was the one that went too far, the one that they wouldn't watch, you know, alongside other films that came in its wake, like I Spit on Your Grave, etc. Made by Wes Craven, who was his first time out as a director, and according to some of the cast members, he wasn't even really a director on the film. And Sean S. Cunningham, who was his partner in crime, doing production on this film, and supplied most of the locations, etc., and a lot of the knowledge, and then went on to produce other amazing series like the Friday the 13th series and the House series, etc. But yeah, Last House on the Left was a film I remember hearing about because I pretty much grew up in my formative years in a video store, and that was one of those titles I knew about. I knew I was not allowed to watch it, but I knew there was like a certain level of horror, and I could watch some titles, and Psycho was one of the first kind of bits of forbidden fruit, but this was like the next one that was like, no, you don't even want to watch this thing. And I know a lot of, horror fans that were just completely like, no, it's like a Salo for Criterion Collection fans. Like, no, I'm not going to watch that. But then I started to hear other people talking about Wes Craven's kind of intentions, and about how it was supposed to be in part a commentary on the war in Vietnam and how shocking images were seen on television at the time, but cinema violence was largely scrubbed clean. So that kind of had me thinking, oh, this is interesting. And you could easily say that it's just a little bit of retroactive kind of re-engineering and retconning, but Wes Craven's a pretty smart guy, or was, rest in peace, Wes Craven. But he's definitely a smart guy, so I can clearly see that being at least somewhat of an intent. But this is one of those films I don't think anybody involved in the making of it knew what they were making until it was unleashed on the unsuspecting public in 1972. And especially as a kind of answer to the Vietnam War, the early 70s were rife with, this was the same year Deliverance came out, which, had a fairly similar kind of case of very, very safe American locales turning into this, this nightmare. And other films like Straw Dogs, were kind of exploring humankind's, civilized humankind's potential for being pushed to the edge and turning feral. And Last House on the Left was, one of those films that inspired so many others like it, including Wes Craven's next film, The Hills of Eyes, which has a very similar case with family. He's very interested in family being pushed and distorted and perverted. And yes, this film, if you have not seen it, is the story of a small family, a girl named Mary Collingwood, who's very Connecticut. She, maybe part of the reason why I like this film. She is edgy to her parents, but in a very, kind of sheltered and secure, very, very suburban lifestyle way. She delights in shocking her parents with her frank talk about sexuality and her affinity for a hard rock band called Bloodlust. And she is going on the eve of her birthday into New York City to see the band Bloodlust with her friend Phyllis, played by Lucy Grantham. And Mary is played by Sandra Peabody, also known as Sandra Cassell. And then a number of other people within the film had fake names, including Dick Towers, who had done some soap opera work as Gaylord St. James as her dad. It sets up this very idyllic, peaceful family life, and she goes out with her friend who's the friend from the wrong side of the tracks. Her parents are in iron and steel. Her mom irons and her dad steels. And they run off and kind of do usual high school era hijinks, hanging out on rocks that are laden with graffiti, and thinking about getting it on with the band members and scoring some grass and drinking some Boone's Farm. And they're on this collision course with a group of characters named Krug and Company. And Krug Stillo is an electric performance by David Hess, who was a musician at the time, known for doing music for Elvis Presley, among many others, and kind of got roped into playing the de facto leader of this gang of escaped convicts. It's him and his son, Junior Stillo, played by Mark Scheffler, and Fred Weasel Podowski, played by Fred Lincoln, and then their kind of unknown accomplice, this wild animal-like creature named Sadie, played by Jeremy Rain, who went on to marry Richard Dreyfuss. So there's this interesting kind of distorted nuclear family, much like the literally nuclear family in The Hills of Eyes. So they're on the run because Krug has escaped from prison. Everyone's aided and abetted him. He keeps his son on heroin to control him, and then puts him out on the streets to kind of, as a bait, essentially, to fish for young ladies. For whatever reason, they want some other young ladies in their life, because Jeremy Rain's kind of becoming a little bit too much of a handful and kind of flirting with women's lib. So Junior successfully fishes for Mary and Phyllis, and then they get trapped within the realm of Krug and Company. And that involves a road trip back to the woods of Connecticut from New York. They never make it to the concert. Their parents are worried, but also wary of overstepping their bounds or getting too nervous, because they've got a young lady and they don't want to be too overbearing. And a lot of the film's kind of harrowing nature is the relative close proximity to safety. Some of the most disturbing scenes are because there's a road nearby or potential help nearby. There's also some bumbling cops that are characters in here, and that's one of the kind of sticking points of the film. The idea of juxtaposing music, much in the way like the zither was used in The Third Man, which I have kind of issues with that as well, is used here in David Hess's folk music, some of which is kind of got a dark edge to it, but there's some bits that are completely over the top with kazoo, etc., and are this kind of like wacky folktale ballad about these villains, the baddies theme, as they call it. So that stuff is pretty wild. And then there's a lot of scenes of the idyllic home life of the Collingwoods set against the kids being trapped in the woods and tortured, etc. But then when it comes to the bumbling cops, Martin Kove of Cobra Kai fame plays the younger of the bumbling cops, and there's all sorts of shenanigans, like straight out of a Smokey and the Bandit movie, where they're trying to hitch a ride with Ada Washington. She's got a truck filled with chickens, and she's telling them they have to ride on the roof, and they fall off and stuff like that. Some people, like Fred Lincoln, feel that didn't work and it pushed it too far, and I'm kind of on the same page with him, whereas a lot of the other actors felt like that was an equivalent juxtaposition, just like the kind of wacky music was. But either way, the idea that these cops out there, the potential saviors are out there, but they're never effective, is part of the trauma. And Mary and Phyllis are never that far from Mary's home, and so all the same kind of beautiful locations that they went out to party at are now the locations where they're trapped and they're trying to escape on numerous occasions. Junior Stillo is not quite as evil as the rest of Krug and Company, and it does kind of play with a little bit of morality to these characters, that they don't necessarily want to be out to kill people, even though on the radio broadcast early on in the film you learn that Krug Stillo has been in jail for at least 6 years for the murder of a couple nuns and a priest, so he's clearly capable of taking human life. But there's this whole kind of undercurrent of these characters playing with being dangerous, but maybe not wanting to kind of cross a line, and what happens if they do. This being a kind of rip-off of The Virgin Spring, which was a Bergman adaptation of classic Scandinavian folktale, of that one being a period piece of young girls meeting highwaymen that rape and torture them, and then running afoul of the parents of one of the girls. And sorry if any of this is kind of bordered on the line of spoilerish information, but yeah, in a film like this, just know that there's not a lot good that's going to happen to anybody. But yeah, the original still maintains a visceral punch 46 years down the line, and some of that is dulled a bit by so many films that have come in its wake that have copied it. So maybe it's not quite as effective on the first viewing to a modern viewer, obviously, than it would be from someone back in the early 70s. But still some pretty intense stuff. And the more I watch it, because I've had to watch multiple cuts of the film, because there's 3 on this Blu-ray CD multi-set, it's kind of interesting because the acting of Krug and company is so good, and the characters are so kind of delicious and over the top, that after a while, even though they're horrible people, you start to uncomfortably not side with them, but you are enthralled by them. And again, David Hess's performance is just captivating. You just can't tear your eyes away from him. It's just raw power beaming from the screen. Yeah, and it's a film, it makes you uncomfortable. It makes you to kind of question whether or not you want to side with these characters when the tables kind of turn against them, when they're clearly horrible people. So, really fascinating stuff, and I think a lot of the people involved in making it were just looking to push buttons and looking to, flip the tables and burn everything down, and then after the fact realized exactly what they'd done, and they've kind of created this indelible, lasting, quote-unquote masterpiece, if you want to call it that, of horror cinema. So video quality is what I would expect from, I think this was like a 1perf Super 16 film, so 16mm. I thought it looked better than The Hills of Ice. I still think The Hills of Ice should have been shot on 35mm. It's kind of more of an epic film. It's a lot bigger, and obviously the expanses and the mountainsides and everything. Whereas Last House on the Left is like perfectly suited for Super 16. It was shot to be documentarian. I mean, these guys were hanging out with people like D.A. Pennebaker at the time and gunning for that sort of feel and aping the look of embedded journalists and the material that was coming out of Vietnam at the time. So that succeeds, and there's a softness, obviously, to the image. The details are blurry, and some of the outdoor scenes and everything, just like it should look. And there's still a lot of good color. I mean, the costume design is a little wacky and over the top, but that's, kind of an interesting palette that it brings to the look of the film. And yeah, that stuff looks great. There's not a lot of that like sickly greenish yellowy look to like skies, etc., that I see in a lot of 16mm projects. So yeah, it's actually pretty impressive looking. The grain is obviously off the charts. There's tons of grain in it, just like it should be. But yeah, again, no damage. There is like a scene in New York City for a couple different takes where there's like, it looks like a giant mass of pubic hair stuck on the camera. I'm not sure why. And there's a few others where there's, pretty big obvious hairs in the gate. But nothing, as for print damage, it's pretty impressive considering what happened to a lot of these prints. They were, trimmed either out of outrage of the product and sent back in damaged, mutilated form, or trimmed to be self-censored by certain outlets. So yeah, so it's amazing it looks as good as it does. The sound is just mono, but it's PCM mono, and it's not too bad. It's not quite as full-bodied as when I watched Deep Red not too long ago, but the folk music by David Hess and the Chapin Brothers is locked in center. It's mono. I love hearing films like this and booming out of a center channel. It recreates the feel of seeing it in a picture house back in the day. So yeah, it's not going to win any awards for fidelity or anything like that, but it wasn't super shrill. I almost want to say the uncut version sounded a little bit better than the Krug and Company and R-rated cuts on disc 2, but that could have just been my mind playing tricks with me. They're both PCM, uncompressed monaural soundtracks. And there's also an isolated score, which is pretty cool on the uncut version. So you can check that out and listen to the music in full-bodied form without dealing with all the dialogue, etc. But yeah, it's mono. So yeah, this film has been reissued numerous times throughout the years. I almost picked up the MGM DVD back in like 2002 or so. I don't know why I didn't, but the extras from that are ported over here. There's extras from Blue Underground, etc. And yeah, so it's a cornucopia of new stuff and old stuff, etc. on The first disc, the first piece is Still Standing, The Legacy of Last House on the Left, which is an archival interview with Wes Craven. It's from MGM from 2009. It's about 14 minutes and 54 seconds. The second item is Celluloid Crime of the Century, which is a 2002 Blue Underground documentary with interviews with Wes Craven, Sean Cunningham, David Hess, Fred Lincoln, Jeremy Rain, Mark Scheffler, and Martin Kove. And that one's got a little bit of a weird audio mix. There's bits where typewriter imagery is superimposed on the screen to tell you about the different key players within the documentary, and some of that sounds a little weird or kind of matrixed. Maybe it's like out of phase or something like that. But I did find myself having to crank that up a little bit. Most of this stuff is standard definition for extras, and the audio is just mostly Dolby Digital 2.0, and nothing really cranks above 10 megabits per second for the most part. But that one's pretty long. It's about 39 minutes and 34 seconds. And it's kind of cool having the multiple making of pieces, because like the truth kind of lies in the middle of all these different stories. So it's cool hearing different takes on things and different takes on certain mythologies about the film. And after a while, you really kind of start to get a feel for it. So it's neat having things spanning times from 2002 and onward, different takes and perspectives on the film. The third piece is Scoring Last House on the Left, which is a roughly 10-minute 2002 interview with David Hess. Looks like at his house at Christmas time, and he does a little bit of playing on guitar as well. The fourth piece is a half-hour archival standard definition 4:3 documentary called It's Only a Movie, The Making of the Last House on the Left. And it's interesting, the dynamic, the difference between the Blue Underground pieces and the MGM ones. You notice that a lot of the actors and some of the crew came out of the porno industry. Fred Lincoln and Lucy Grantham had done Blue movies, and the makeup artist Ann Paul also did Blue movies, and everyone is pretty open about their history with the porno industry. Wes Craven's also had a connection with that, and coming out of the kind of world of hippie, free love, and everything like that, the porno industry wasn't, kind of what it is now, and a lot of up-and-coming filmmakers got involved in it, and Fred Lincoln was pretty open about, hey, I get paid to get it on with beautiful ladies, I'm totally down for that. One of the kind of real fascinating aspects of this film that you find out throughout all these featurettes is that the actors were the ones that felt uncomfortable with the pretty close to hardcore nature of the original Night of Vengeance draft of the script, and that they were the ones that kind of manned together and came at Wes Craven and Sean Cunningham and said, we should make this just a straight up exploitation horror film just loaded with violence, etc., but we shouldn't go full hardcore. So it is interesting that there could have been an even more twisted variation on this film that would have been rated X and kind of a Caligula, like one half exploitation horror film, one half hardcore pornography film. But Fred Lincoln in particular wasn't into getting it on with people that were covered in blood and looked like they'd been assaulted, etc. So that's pretty fascinating. The fifth piece on the first disc is Forbidden Footage, where the cast and crew kind of go over some of the more controversial sequences. That's another older MGM piece. And some of those older MGM ones have Lucy Grantham in there. Sandra Peabody is nowhere to be found in any of the special features. She's mentioned a few times. Wes Craven says he's run into her in Oregon and she's fine, etc. But Lucy Grantham kind of dropped off the radar after those 2002 pieces and never came back again. That one's about 8 minutes or so. Also interesting, Steve Miner of Friday the 13th fame shows up in there because he was part of the crew as well. So it's cool seeing his take on some of this information. The sixth piece is Junior Story, which is a new 2017 interview with Mark Scheffler, and it's funny how different he looks. He's still a kind of youngish character with a hat on in a lot of the archival interviews. In this one, he's got a full-on mega beard and just is transformed. He looks so different, and he's obviously very frank and open about his involvement in the film and how he became connected with it. And he actually was managed by the actor Gaylord St. James, who played Mary's father. And the seventh piece is an interview with Ann Paul, who is the makeup artist, and she is completely open and upfront with the fact that she was going to be one of the girls she was auditioning for and didn't land it. And they said, "Hey, can you do makeup?" And she's like, "Sure," and totally didn't know what she was doing. And that's about 13 minutes, 52 seconds. And the official title of that is Blood and Guts, a conversation with Ann Paul. The eighth piece wasn't actually listed on my press release, but it's The Road Leads to Terror, the locations of Last House. And that's a 2018 HD shot piece by Michael Gingold, who takes you around places in New York and Westport, Connecticut, where a lot of this material was shot. That's relatively short. It's only about 5 minutes and 48 seconds. The ninth piece is a deleted scene, which is available in the Crugen Company cut, but it's only about a minute long, and it's an extended scene with one character's fate and other people finding the character in a horrible state. And that was trimmed out even of the uncut version. The 10th piece is a bunch of outtakes and dailies, which is pretty fascinating because apparently Roy Frumkes, as we find out on the second disc, who was a fan of the film, reached out to the filmmakers, and the filmmakers responded by sending him all of the archival materials related to it, all the original scripts, all the original notes, and all the dailies. So this is from his archives. It's 47 minutes and 38 seconds of just straight silent footage. Mostly a lot of the footage with the gang chasing down Phyllis, and pretty much a lot of the stuff out in the woods. But yeah, they did quite a lot of takes for a 16mm cheapy film. And yeah, that stuff is pretty fascinating. It's silent, of course, so you have no idea what they're saying, but it's worth watching. And then after that is a bunch of trailers, TV spots, and radio spots. There's 2 trailers, there's 1 television spot, and there's about almost 6 minutes of radio ads, and including some of the later stuff when they re-released the film in conjunction with the Amityville Horror. So it's pretty cool hearing them kind of pitch both films together. And then finally there's about a minute worth of still imagery from photography on set, and then another minute or so worth of still imagery from the promotional materials for the film, all the posters, etc., including an image of the German Laserdisc, which I thought was pretty cool. There's actually a lot of Laserdisc moments within these special features, which we'll talk about shortly. And then, yeah, the first disc is wrapped up with a trio of audio commentaries, which is pretty cool. The first being a newer commentary with Bill Ackerman, who's from the Supporting Characters podcast. I haven't heard it, but Amanda Reyes, who wrote a book called Are You in the House Alone? TV Film Companion. And that one is just lightning fast. Bill Ackerman in particular is just dumping out information wicked fast, and it's almost like the two of them are competing as to who's going to unleash the most vital information. So it's less of a conversation because you get a feeling that they each know all of these little details about the film, and that they're just like having a minutia off. So you really have to pay attention and keep up. There is a lot of information dropped in there that is it's fascinating to listen to, but it is very, very rapid fire and intense. So there's that. There's another commentary, which is an archival one with Wes Craven and Sean S. Cunningham, and that one is a little bit more relaxed, and it's rather fun to listen to because Wes Craven is a bit of a character. He's a joker, or especially when he's around Sean Cunningham. So he kind of always conjures up all these fake kind of truths and little bits of trivia about the film, mixed in with obviously truth tales about the making of it and how they got together, etc. But he's very much like a class clown during that commentary track, and he's very mischievous. So that one's fun. And then the last one is the commentary of all commentaries. It's David Hess, Fred Lincoln, and Mark Scheffler. And when you see the disclaimer at the front of Blu-ray saying that the commentaries therein are not reflective of the studios, this is the kind of commentary they're talking about, because it is off the chains, off the rails. The guys, they're arguing with each other at one point, they're in love with each other in the next, and they'll say things about Wes Craven and his directing skills at the time that are obviously very frank and open, and they'll clearly talk and drop gossip and talk about all the sexual encounters that they had with some of the cast and crew, and all sorts of things. So that one is, man, it's like commentary that goes to 11. And it goes like all the way to the end. So, and Fred Lincoln in particular has a bunch of kind of like bone mow moments in there. So, and it's interesting them talking about a remake of the film within this archival commentary, because they were like, no, you can't have a remake. And then in 2009, they did make a remake, which did some things right, but dropped the ball in a lot of other respects. And it's also interesting to hear them referencing Quentin Tarantino and how about they should all be in like Tarantino movies. And Tarantino did use some of David Hess's music from Last House in the score for The Hateful Eight, if I remember correctly. So it's pretty cool, the archival nature of it. You can hear their thoughts of it on the time and how some of that material has come to pass in the years since. And that's about it for Disc 1. Disc 2 has a decent amount of special features as well. It's got 2 cuts of the film proper. It's got the Krug & Company cut, which is about an hour and 23 minutes. The uncut version is about an hour and 24 minutes. And then it's got an R-rated cut, which is an hour and 21 minutes. Yeah, this film had so many different titles because people that were distributors could come up with different titles. It was also known as the Sex Crime of the Century, and it was written as Night of Vengeance, but it's pretty fascinating, the story behind the distributor who came up with the name and pretty much the entire campaign for Last House on the Left. So that's some pretty cool stuff to listen to. But yeah, there's 2 different versions of the film. I'm assuming it uses branching technology to jump between the different moments within. They both have PCM audio soundtracks that sounded about the same as the uncut version. And there's no isolated score this time around. And there's also no scene access on there. There are chapter stops that you can jump around on, but there is no scene access in the menu, which is pretty interesting. So I guess they're just included as extras more. But yeah, they looked just as good from what I could tell. I didn't do any direct comparisons. I just watched everything in order, but the imagery looked as good as the uncut version. And for extras, there's the Craven Touch, which is a new featurette, obviously giving a bit of a loving retrospective talking about Wes Craven from a lot of his collaborators, including Sean Cunningham, Charles Bernstein, Peter Locke, Mark Irwin, and Amanda Weiss, which is pretty cool seeing her. The second piece was Early Days and Night of Vengeance, which is the interview with Roy Frumkes, where he has some Laserdisc behind him, which I thought was cool. But he talks about his connection with the film and how Wes Craven and everybody gave him all these archival materials. That one's just under 10 minutes. The third one is Tales That'll Tear Your Heart Out, which is really just 11 minutes of silent footage from a piece that Frumkes mentions in his interview that he and Wes Craven and David Hess also got together to do an anthology series kind of thing in 1976, and it fell apart. But he has some of the existent footage from this kind of ghost cowboy story that Wes Craven had been working on with him. So it's pretty cool. It's silent, but it's about 11 minutes, and it's fun to watch. The fourth piece on the second disc is Mark Scheffler in conversation at America Cinematheque. And apparently in July of 2017, they had a piece called Cinematic Void Rated X Triple Feature, which is moderated by James Branscombe. It's about 12 minutes and 25 seconds. It's super fun. Mark Scheffler is just, eating up the audience attention. And yeah, it's a cool little piece. And it actually sounds pretty good. I know they're mic'd and the camera's actually pretty close to them, which I appreciate because audio on kind of public appearances and panels and stuff like that tends to be a little bit rough on home video when they drop those things on there. The audio for all these featurettes are kind of like all over the map. A lot of it's 2-channel Dolby Digital, and the video for the Roy Frumkes one was kind of like washed out and strangely like standard definition looking, even though I think it was in HD on here. But yeah, so it's all over the map. After that one is Songs in the Key of Krug, which is archival interview with David Hess, but it says never before seen, and it looked to be newer material from before he passed away. It's 9 minutes and 41 seconds, and that one's more getting into the kind of acting mode and less about the music aspect of it. Then there's also another one that wasn't listed in my bonus materials press release, Krug Conquers England, which was a 2000 piece put out by Lurid Films from when the film was screened in England because of a kind of legal situation, because it's a video nasty and it was forbidden from being shown there. A bunch of film festival organizers were able to kind of pitch to a local township to allow a screening of it, because apparently that's a possibility, even though it's banned across the nation, that individual townships could override that rule and show it. And there was a screening of it and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and there's a lot of footage that David has talking about being Krug and then signing things for fans, including one cool bit where a fan rolls up with a house on the edge of the park laserdisc and a Texas Chainsaw Massacre laserdisc for Hess and Gunnar Hansen to sign. So go laserdisc. So that one's about 24 minutes, and that one is definitely all over the map audio quality. Hess's commentary sounds good, but there's some of the organizers' discussions that are a little very quiet, and you're gonna have to ride the volume to listen to that one all the way through. Oh yeah, there's also a 40-second Wes Craven introduction to the film ported over from an earlier, I think the 2002 DVD. That's on the uncut version on disc 1. I do like at the end of the commentary with Krug and gang, except for Sadie, that Fred Lincoln says for the people watching in England that the Queen would be ashamed of them. So all in all, the bonus materials are off the charts. There's not a lot of effort to make a new making of documentary, because there have been so many making of documentaries. So it was definitely smart just to include those. Between all of those, you get a good feel for it. I do like that Wes Craven at one point says that there's some things that you should take to your grave with you. He's some people are more uncomfortable with the film than others. It's great actually in the commentary with the actors when they all gang up on Fred Lincoln about his outspoken nature of being disappointed with the film, and him thinking that it's a horrible film and that it should have been banned in the States as well. It's pretty good when they kind of tackle him, because everyone's relatively proud of their work in it. And that's the thing, that the acting is there's some bits that are a little bit wooden and clunky and stuff, but for a cheap 16mm film, the acting is great. And Krug and Company, part of what makes it so effective and harrowing is just how effective and believable they are as those characters. And some of the tales they talk about in the commentaries and special features about how being on the streets of the city after that, and people would just steer completely clear of them because they were psychopaths, apparently, because the documentarian nature of the film really worked and kind of embedded itself in people's minds. So yeah, Arrow even dropped a bonus disc, a CD copy of the soundtrack, which was pretty cool. It's got 20 tracks, 17 of which are the kind of score of the film, and it's a mixture of sound effects and dialogue from the film with the music, and the music is roughly the same length it is in the film. It's not one of those cases where you hear a song in its entirety and bits of it were used for the film, because the songs were used as the score to the film. So yeah, sometimes the song will just be like a minute or a minute and a half or something like that. There's a decent amount of bass to it. It sounded pretty good. It sounded almost at first like it was just audio ripped from the movie, but the dialogue and the kind of little peppered bits of audio spice there dropped in were from different parts from what I'd remembered in the film itself. So it was almost like a Tarantino-esque CD soundtrack where you have bits of dialogue in the movie to mix it up a little bit. But yeah, it sounds good. The 3 bonus tracks sound a little bit better and fuller, and that's a vocal version of Daddy Put Your Coat of Many Colors On, a song called New York Times, and another song called Promised Land. The real interesting thing about the music of it is the connection to Wes Craven and Harry Chapin. I've seen some older interviews where Wes Craven talks about when he went to New York for the first time. It was after he was teaching in New York at college, and one of his students was Stephen Chapin, who had a brother named Harry Chapin, and then he sent him over there to learn how to edit at the hands of Harry Chapin, who was working for a finishing company, post-production house for industrial films. And in one interview from a book I had read, Wes Craven said, "Oh, not the folk singer Harry Chapin, but the folk singer Harry Chapin did come out of a film kind of world and an early career in that, and actually was nominated for an Academy Award for a boxing documentary he did, or a short." And then come to find out, the Chapin brothers, the actual brothers of Harry Chapin, Steve, the one that Wes Craven taught, and Tom are the musicians on the Last House on the Left soundtrack. David Hess wrote the songs and performed and played guitar, but Stephen Chapin did a lot of the kind of fleshing out of the score, and Tom Chapin's on there. I forgot which one plays the kazoo, but so it is definitely Harry Chapin's band. So the weird thing that this kind of brings to light is, that the Harry Chapin of Cats in the Cradle fame is the guy who taught Wes Craven how to edit film. So pretty fascinating. And then later, Tom Chapin married Wes Craven's ex-wife. So yeah, it's a whole wild, crazy world of Chapins and Cravens. But yeah, my mom being a giant Harry Chapin fan, I'm sure she'll appreciate this. I don't think she'll want to watch the film, but if your moms love Harry Chapin, maybe don't tell them to watch Last House on the Left, but you can let them borrow the CD and check it out. Obviously, I was thrown the first time seeing it by the folk music nature of the music and that juxtaposition between the horror and the violence and the kind of folky early 70s, hippie vibe. But there is a darkness to some of the tracks, as I mentioned before, and they get catchy after a while. They kind of work their way into your brain. So that was a fun little extra. I liked having that on there as well. This release was supposed to come out already, but apparently now the street date, as of the time of this recording, I don't know if it's going to get pushed back or pushed up or whatever, it's supposed to be July 3rd. But if you've picked up Last House on the Left multiple times already, you may have to decide whether or not you want to get it again and triple or quadruple dip or whatever. But yeah, as a first-time owner of the film, this is a comprehensive set, and it looks as good as I'd ever expect it to look. Sounds as good as I'd ever expect it to sound, and yeah, I like the film. As weird as that sounds, it's a strange kind of nasty piece of film history, but it's got something to it. There's something bubbling under the surface that's really fascinating, and the acting in it is just intense as all get out, especially the Krug and Company characters. So yeah, it's only a Blu-ray, but it's a really good one. And sadly, I don't have the finishing packaging. I just have the kind of screener copy that I got wicked early. It's going to have a reversible sleeve featuring original and newly commissioned artwork by Paul Schipper, and there's a limited edition perfect bound book featuring some new writing on it by author Stephen Thrower, and there's a double-sided poster featuring the original and newly commissioned artwork, 6 lobby card reproductions, and of course there's English subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing as well on here, and that's about it. I mean, this was a pretty comprehensive review. Sorry for putting you to sleep out there. Hopefully you guys powered through it and enjoyed it. But I really enjoyed the making of features. It's funny because my wife is not interested in the film at all. She's a little bit more now. I think she's kind of interested to watch it. But she was really into watching the special features. After I was kind of telling her about some of the stories after watching the first one, I watched this whole thing after many, many nights. So this was like my week. 1 week was like every night back into the land of Last House on the Left, which was really interesting because is that a land you want to go into that deep? But I found out, yeah, it kind of is. So yeah, I became fascinated with the special features, and then my wife was like, yeah, that sounds great. So I ended up rewatching a bunch of them and then watching them with her, and just the tale of making this cheap film in Connecticut, go Connecticut, is just, eminently viewable and definitely a really cool story. So rest in peace, Wes Craven, and hopefully you guys get to check this out shortly, and if you're a fan of the film, I'm sure you're going to dig it. So cheers, thanks for hanging out, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.